Greenness and youthful ignorance were still catching me out. I got a call from my mate Paul's brother AJ. He ran an excavator hire firm in the next town, and I had cleared a few bits of scrap from his yard previously. One regrettable instance of this being the time his yard foreman, a young guy who had been at school with me, instructed that I clear two cylinders of worn out tracked excavator rollers, only to then get an irate call from AJ telling me his man had given me his best spares and to bring the bloody lot back a bit smart. This time he had a job on site at the old town pumping station. The place was being converted to a dwelling, and all the metal detritus had to go. I arrived in the Bedford, hung about whilst they filled an enormous hole in with a mini digger, then got on with loading. I was about to get strapped down and head off when Chris, the guy I was at school with, shouted to hold on. There was a large item to go on top of the load. He then slowly tracked from behind some bushes, pushing an enormous underground fuel tank. No doubt what had been in the hole. Now, I'd never encountered one of these before. Each revolution as he pushed it along with the mini digger, stinking remnants of stale fuel dribbled out. Not then knowing the implications of this, we faffed about trying to load it by rolling it with the digger up my lorry's ramps and then onto the top of the load with the winch. I then made my way off to the scrapyard with what I thought was a nice extra 3/4 ton of heavy iron. The wiser among you will anticipate what came next. I rolled onto the weighbridge at the scrapyard, and old John came out, took one look at the underground tank, and said to me, "No bloody chance, mate. It hasn't been cut, and it's full of fumes that will go up with just one spark. Tip the rest of the load, but that goes back with you, pal." I unloaded the other crap, and they plonked the tank back onto my Bedford. Maybe it was just them, I thought. So I tried the other yard. They were even bloody quicker to dispatch me away. I drove home feeling completely stitched up, which of course I had been. Dad put his foot down when I said I was going to fill it up with water and then cut it with my burner set, rightly saying he didn't want all that contaminated water going into the ground in the yard. I was stuck with the bloody thing then. Fate eventually smiled on me though. Our local steam rally organiser turned up, spotted it, and said he would take it as a donation in order to use as a septic storage tank for the rally's toilets. I happily delivered to him, free of charge. AJ got me into another scrape a good while later when he summoned me to collect a scrap car from his yard. I was told the owner, one of his ex-employees, had been taking the piss and partially stripped it, then left it there for over a year. When I turned up, I was greeted by the remains of an Alfa Romeo GTV in red, without its roof. I dragged it onto the lorry and then went to view another job. Walking back into my office at the yard upon my return, the answer phone was flashing with several messages, the content of which included two from AJ, one from his ex-employee, and another from a haulage farm boss who the bloke was now working for, saying I was to bring the car's remains to their yard ASAP. It all got ironed out in the end, and I eventually got paid twice. Once from the owner for transporting the vehicle, and once from AJ for all the bloody upset and hassle. This sort of working things out from the tank issue several years before. Folk often made the assumption that because I was young and a scrappy, then ergo I must be as thick as two short planks too. I'll leave you all to make your own observations there, but for one local it was all a bit too much. Mervyn, a local chap who did fencing, and that's with hedges, not with a sword by the way, had known our family for years. I had cleared metal from his place several times, the last to evict a couple of international B-46 balers the previous summer. The man arranged with me to pick him up in the lorry, and we were to go down to the coffin factory a few miles away to collect a large load of timber offcuts he had been given for firewood. In exchange for this transport, I was to get a few car shells his two boys had stripped out and flattened with their draught. On my way to collect him, I had stopped at the local village shop for that day's Financial Times. This being pre-internet, I wanted to check how some of my shares were doing, having read up and invested ever since turning 18 a few years previously. Not giving it much thought, I left the paper beside me on the lorry's seat to read later. Mervyn climbed up in the cab and we set off. Glancing down at the paper, then at me, as I drove along in the old Bedford, Mervyn said, "There's a good lad. Got your grand's paper for her." I smiled at him and said, "No, it's mine." He started to snigger and chuckle to himself. Slightly perplexed, I drove on. We got loaded, and whilst Mervyn went into the office to see the foreman, I sat in the cab reading my FT. "You got that upside down, kid," he laughed on returning. I hadn't, of course. I just looked at him witheringly, but smiled inside, knowing my British Steel shares had just made me a few £100 the previous day. He doubled down as we started to unload. Don't forget about Grand's paper now, lad. Locals being as they were, I then had to endure various remarks, like when did I learn to read, from his sons upon collecting the scrap cars, and my cousin asking me, what's Warren Buffett's gran investing in these days? I genuinely couldn't fathom why it was so hilarious to them all. But the arrival of a Mercedes 190E later that summer, purchased with my share earnings, seemed to wind them up even more. Hello there. Thank you for watching my video. If you've enjoyed this one, would like to see a few more, then please subscribe, like and share. It is appreciated. It does mean a lot. All the best to you all. Take care.